Imagine for a moment that you are standing in the control room of a vast, complex city. Lights are flashing, data streams are pouring in, and there is a constant hum of electricity keeping everything alive. Now, imagine that a fire breaks out in one of the districts. In a well-functioning city, the fire department receives a signal, rushes to the scene, extinguishes the flames, and then, crucially, they go home. The sirens stop. The water is turned off. Peace returns. But what if the fire alarm never stopped ringing? What if the water hoses were left running at full blast, flooding the streets long after the fire was out? What if the emergency responders started tearing down the buildings they were sworn to protect? This is not a story about a city. This is the story of the human body when it is gripped by rheumatoid arthritis. It is a story of a biological fire alarm that is stuck in the on position. For decades, modern medicine has tried to silence this alarm using chemistry. We have thrown pills, injections, and infusions at the problem. We have flooded the body with drugs designed to dampen the immune system. And for many people, these chemical fire extinguishers work. But for a significant number of others, they do not. For hundreds of thousands of patients, the drugs stop working, or the side effects become unbearable. They are left trapped in a body that is attacking itself, with no remaining options. But what if the answer wasn't more chemistry? What if the answer was electricity?
Today, we are going to dive deep into a landmark scientific study that has fundamentally challenged the way we think about treating autoimmune disease. We are going to look at a clinical trial that asked a radical question. Can we hack the human nervous system to reset the immune system? Can we implant a small device, no larger than a vitamin tablet, that speaks the language of the body's nerves and tell the immune system to stand down? This is the story of the Reset-RA study. It is a journey into the vagus nerve, the superhighway of the body. It is a story of rigorous science, of sham surgeries, and of a new frontier called Bioelectronic Medicine. By the end of this video, you will understand not just the results of this pivotal trial, but what it means for the future of human health. To truly appreciate the magnitude of this study, we first have to understand the enemy, rheumatoid arthritis, often abbreviated as RA. If you do not have RA, it is easy to mistake it for simple wear and tear arthritis, the kind that makes your knees creak when it rains. But RA is entirely different. It is an autoimmune disease. It is systemic. That means it is not just in your joints, it is in your blood, your tissues, and your inflammatory pathways. In a healthy body, the immune system is a precision instrument. It hunts down viruses and bacteria with lethal accuracy. But in RA, the immune system makes a catastrophic error. It mistakes the synovium, the soft tissue lining your joints, as a foreign invader. The body unleashes a weapon known as a cytokine storm. Cytokines are small proteins that act like messengers. In this case, they scream, "Attack, attack." The result is inflammation that causes painful swelling, stiffness that can last for hours every morning, and eventually, the erosion of bone. The joints literally dissolve under the relentless assault of the body's own defenses. For the last 20 years, the gold standard of treatment has been a class of drugs called biologics, or targeted synthetic DMARDs. You might have heard of them. They are miracle drugs for many. They block those screaming cytokine messengers. But here is the medical reality that set the stage for the Reset-RA trial. These drugs do not work for everyone. There is a specific population of patients known as incomplete responders. These are people who have tried the first line of defense, like methotrexate, and it failed. They moved on to the heavy artillery, the biologics, and those failed too. Or perhaps the drugs worked for a while, and then the body adapted and the pain returned. This is a terrifying place to be. When you run out of drug options, you are facing a future of progressive disability. Furthermore, these powerful drugs come with a cost. Because they suppress the immune system globally, they can leave patients vulnerable to serious infections. It is a high-wire balancing act between stopping the arthritis and keeping the patient safe from other diseases. The researchers behind the Reset-RA study looked at this landscape and asked, Is there a way to target the inflammation without flooding the entire body with immunosuppressive drugs? This brings us to the core hypothesis of the trial. It centers on a biological mechanism that was mapped out in the early 2000s, known as the inflammatory reflex. For a long time, we thought the immune system and the nervous system were separate entities. We thought the brain didn't really talk to the white blood cells. We were wrong. It turns out there is a direct, hard-line connection between your brain and your immune system. That connection is the vagus nerve. Vagus comes from the Latin word for wandering. It is the longest nerve in the body, running from your brainstem, down your neck, through your chest, and into your abdomen. It touches your heart, your lungs, and your digestive tract. The researchers proposed that the vagus nerve acts like a brake pedal for inflammation. When the nerve is active, it releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. This chemical signal travels to the spleen, an organ that acts as a headquarters for immune cells. When that signal hits the spleen, it tells the macrophages, the soldier cells of the immune system, to stop producing those inflammatory cytokines we talked about earlier. The theory was elegant. If the brake pedal is broken or sluggish in people with RA, could we tap into the wire and press the brake manually? Could we implant a small pulse generator, essentially a pacemaker for the nerve, that delivers a tiny electrical signal to the vagus nerve, stimulating it to release that anti-inflammatory acetylcholine? This was the question the RESET RA trial was designed to answer. It wasn't just testing a gadget, it was testing a fundamental change in how we treat disease. Now, let's look at how they actually tested this. This is where science gets incredibly interesting, and honestly, quite brave.
The study, officially titled A Study of the Set Point System for Treatment of Moderate to Severe Rheumatoid Arthritis, was a Phase 3 pivotal trial. In the world of clinical research, Phase 3 is the final boss. It is the large-scale test required before a treatment can be approved for the general public. The researchers recruited 242 participants across 41 different medical centers in the United States. These were not just any patients. To be included in this study, participants had to have moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis, but more importantly, they had to be people who had already failed to respond to or could not tolerate at least one biologic or targeted synthetic drug. Think about that population. These are people with refractory disease. Their arthritis is stubborn. It fights back. Proving that a new treatment works in this group is much harder than proving it works in a newly diagnosed patient. The study design was randomized, double-blind, and sham-controlled. Let's break down why those words are so critical, especially the sham-controlled part. In drug trials, you give one group the real pill and the other group a sugar pill or placebo. But how do you do a placebo when the treatment is surgery? You perform a sham surgery. Every single one of the 242 participants went into the operating room. They were all put under general anesthesia. The surgeons made an incision in the neck of every patient. They exposed the vagus nerve. For the treatment group, the surgeon placed the active micro-regulator device on the nerve. For the control group, the surgeon did everything exactly the same, exposed the nerve, manipulated the tissue, but did not place the active therapeutic device on the nerve.
Why go to such lengths? Because the placebo effect is incredibly powerful, especially in pain conditions. If a patient knows they had surgery, they might feel better just because they believe they should. By performing sham surgery, the researchers ensured that neither the patient nor the doctor assessing their joints knew who had the active device and who did not. This blinded period lasted for 12 weeks. During these 12 weeks, the patients in the treatment group received a pre-programmed stimulation. The device would turn on once a day, typically while the patient was relaxing or sleeping. It would deliver a tiny electrical pulse for just 1 minute. That's it. 1 minute of electricity per day to reset the immune system. So, what happened? After 12 weeks of secrecy, the data was unlocked and analyzed. The primary goal of the study, the finish line they had to cross, was a metric called ACR20. Let me explain what ACR20 means. It is a standard set by the American College of Rheumatology. To achieve an ACR20 response, a patient must see a 20% improvement in the number of tender joints, a 20% improvement in the number of swollen joints, and a 20% improvement in 3 out of 5 other measures, such as blood tests for inflammation or the patient's own assessment of their pain. Basically, ACR20 asks, is the patient at least 20% better? The results were statistically significant. The researchers observed that nearly 35%, specifically 35.2%, of the patients receiving the active vagus nerve stimulation achieved that ACR response. In comparison, in the sham control group, the people who had the surgery but no therapy, only about 24% achieved that response.
Now, you might be looking at those numbers and thinking, 35% versus 24%? Is that a big deal? In the context of this specific patient population, the answer is yes. Remember, these are patients who had failed other aggressive treatments. The fact that a 1-minute electrical pulse could drive a significant wedge between the treatment group and the placebo group is a proof of concept that the biology works. But the data gets even more compelling when we look at the subgroups. The researchers found that the therapy worked best in patients who were not too far gone down the road of multiple drug failures. In the group of patients who had failed only one prior biologic drug, the response rate to the electrical therapy jumped to over 44%, compared to only 19% in the control group. This is a massive insight. It suggests that bioelectric medicine might be most effective if we use it earlier in the treatment journey, rather than waiting until a patient has failed 5 or 6 different drugs. Beyond just the ACR20 score, the researchers looked at disease activity scores. They found that patients receiving the stimulation had lower DAS28 CRP scores, a fancy way of combining joint counts and blood inflammation markers into a single number. And here is perhaps the most exciting part for the long term: durability. The study didn't end at 12 weeks. After that primary period, the patients in the control group were allowed to cross over and receive the active therapy. The researchers followed everyone out to 1 year. They found that the improvements didn't fade away. The patients who responded tended to stay better. The effect was durable. Unlike some drugs where the body develops antibodies and neutralizes the medicine, electricity is consistent. The nerve doesn't build up a tolerance to the signal in the same way. Now, we must talk about safety. In medicine, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Every intervention carries risk. In the world of standard RA drugs, the risks are often systemic. Because you are suppressing the immune system, you worry about tuberculosis, pneumonia, or even certain cancers. In the RESET RA study, the safety profile looked very different. Because the electrical signal is targeted, it travels down the nerve to the spleen. It does not seem to wipe out the immune system's ability to fight a common cold or a flu in the rest of the body. The researchers did not see the high rates of infection that are often the plague of biologic drugs. However, this is a surgical procedure, and the vagus nerve is located in a crowded neighborhood in the neck. It sits right next to the carotid artery and the nerve that controls your vocal cords. The most common side effect observed in the trial was related to this anatomy. Some patients experienced hoarseness or vocal cord dysfunction. This makes sense. The recurrent laryngeal nerve, which moves your vocal cords, branches off the vagus nerve. If the surgery irritates it, or if the stimulation bleeds over slightly, it can affect the voice. In the study, this side effect was generally mild to moderate. For most patients, it was a temporary issue related to the surgery itself, resolving as they healed. But it is a real risk. There were also the standard risks of any surgery: incision site pain, swelling, or the risk of the device migrating. But remarkably, the rate of serious adverse events related to the device was very low, hovering around 1.7%. When you compare this to the safety profile of lifelong immunosuppressive drugs, many physicians and patients might find the trade-off acceptable: a one-time surgical risk and a potential for a raspy voice in exchange for avoiding a lifetime of pills that compromise your immune defense. I want to pause here and take a moment to really marvel at the mechanism of action, because it is unlike anything else in the pharmacy. When we take a pill, we rely on pharmacokinetics. The pill dissolves, enters the blood, spreads through the entire body, and hopefully hits the target receptors. It is a broadcast signal. It goes everywhere. The set point system tested in this trial utilizes neuromodulation. It is a hardwired signal.
The device is programmed to deliver a specific dose of electricity. We are talking about milliamps and microseconds. The researchers have spent years figuring out the code. If the pulse is too weak, the nerve ignores it. If it's too strong, it might cause pain or slow the heart rate, since the vagus nerve also talks to the heart. They found a Goldilocks zone, a specific frequency that activates the fibers going to the spleen but avoids the fibers going to the heart. When that signal arrives at the spleen, it triggers the release of acetylcholine. This neurotransmitter binds to a specific receptor on the surface of macrophages called the alpha-7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. When that key turns that lock, it shuts down the nuclear machinery inside the cell that produces TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, the bad guys of inflammation. It is arguably one of the most sophisticated examples of biological hacking we have ever achieved. We are using the body's own wiring to turn off the factory that produces the poison. Why does this trial matter to you, even if you don't have rheumatoid arthritis? The RESET-RA trial is a proof of principle for the entire field of bioelectronic medicine. For the last century, medicine has stood on two pillars: chemistry, drugs, and physics, surgery, radiation. This trial helps erect a third pillar: electricity. If we can treat rheumatoid arthritis by stimulating the vagus nerve, what else can we treat? The vagus nerve connects to the gut. Could this treat Crohn's disease or colitis? It connects to the lungs. Could this treat asthma? It connects to the pancreas. Could this play a role in metabolism or diabetes? The success of the RESET-RA trial in demonstrating a clinical benefit in a rigorous sham-controlled environment validates the idea that the nervous system controls the immune system. It moves the field from interesting theory to proven therapy. It also offers a glimpse of a future where patients might not be tethered to a pharmacy. Imagine a patient who receives an implant, charges it wirelessly once a week by wearing a simple collar for a few minutes, and otherwise goes about their life. No daily pills, no refrigeration of injectable drugs, no travel restrictions. This study showed that for a third of the patients who had run out of options, this future is already here. However, responsible science demands that we also look at the limitations. This therapy did not work for everyone. Remember, 35% reached the ACR20 threshold. That means 65% did not reach that specific level of improvement at the 12-week mark. Rheumatoid arthritis is a heterogeneous disease. It is messy. What drives inflammation in one person might be slightly different in another. Some patients might have a vagus nerve defect that this device fixes, while others might have inflammation driven by pathways that the nerve can't control. This is the next challenge for researchers. How do we predict who will be a super responder? Can we develop a blood test or a nerve scan that tells us, yes, this patient is perfect for the device, before we do the surgery? The study also highlighted the challenge of the placebo effect. The fact that 24% of the sham group improved shows just how much our mind influences our body. It sets a high bar for any new device to prove it is truly doing something biological. Before we conclude, a necessary reminder. The information presented in this video is for educational purposes only. I am a communicator, not your doctor. This study represents a specific clinical trial with specific inclusion and exclusion criteria. Rheumatoid arthritis is a complex, serious condition. If you are living with RA, never stop or change your medication based on a video. Always consult your rheumatologist. The device discussed here requires surgical implantation and has specific indications approved by regulatory bodies like the FDA. The RESET-RA study is more than just a collection of data points. It is a beacon of hope.
For the participants in the trial, it was a chance to reclaim their lives from a debilitating disease. For the scientific community, it was a validation of decades of work mapping the neural circuits of immunity. We are standing on the precipice of a new era. We are moving from a time where we only knew how to flood the body with chemicals to a time where we can speak the precise electrical language of life itself. The fire alarm of inflammation does not have to ring forever. We are finally learning how to find the switch to turn it off. Thank you for listening.
If you found this deep dive into the future of medicine valuable, consider subscribing and sharing this with someone who loves science or someone who battles autoimmune disease. Knowledge is the first step toward better health.